My sister, Isabella, will tell you a story about the night she caught me with her husband. She'll paint a tragic, cinematic picture. The perfect wife, betrayed in her own sanctuary, the life she built so meticulously shattered in an instant by the two people she loved most. She'll describe the music, a frantic salsa beat spilling from the ballroom, the cloying scent of the gardenias she'd insisted on, and the single, devastating image of my lips on his. She will cast herself as the victim, the noble, wounded queen of a stolen kingdom, a martyr to my lust and his weakness. Her version of the story is neat. It's clean. It's a lie. The truth is, the kiss she saw wasn't a moment of sudden, passionate betrayal. It was a victory lap. It was the culmination of a year-long campaign, a meticulous and deliberate siege I had laid upon her perfect life. By the time her shadow fell across us in that dressing room, I had already captured the king, undermined the castle walls, and was quietly redirecting the flow of gold from her treasury into my own. That kiss wasn't the beginning of her world's end. It was simply the moment she finally opened her eyes and realized the war was already lost, the ink on the surrender treaty long since dry. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Sofia Garcia, and I have lived my entire life in the shadow of a saint. Isabella, the brilliant. Isabella, the responsible. Isabella, the self-made. From the time we were little girls in our small, pastel-pink house in Little Havana, she was the one our parents praised for her diligence, her focus, her ambition. She got the perfect grades. She started her first small business, selling flan to neighbors at age 12, complete with a hand-drawn ledger. She was the architect, the builder, the one destined for greatness, the living embodiment of our parents' American dream. And I was Sophia, the pretty one, the charming one, the one who could light up a room with a smile, but was never trusted to keep the lights on. I was the ornament, while she was the entire glitter tree. They loved me, of course, but they admired her. There is a profound and terrible difference. That admiration became the soil in which my ambition took root, a dark, tangled, and deeply patient thing. I didn't just want to be seen. I wanted to be admired. I didn't want to build my own little empire. I wanted to prove I could run hers better than she ever could. I remember one school science fair, with a clarity that still feels like a fresh wound. Isabella, at 11, had built a working model of a hydroelectric dam, a masterpiece of engineering with running water and a tiny light bulb that flickered when the turbine spun. The teachers, the parents, my own parents, they looked at it with awe. I, at 9, had spent a month creating a diorama of the solar system. It was beautiful. I had used glitter and paint and suspended the planets on invisible threads, each a perfect, shimmering jewel against a velvet black sky. It was a work of art. The judges came to my table, smiled condescendingly, and said, "Oh, how lovely, Sophia. So creative." Then they moved to Isabella's project, where they spent 20 minutes asking her about fluid dynamics and load-bearing capacities. She won first prize. I received an honorable mention for artistic merit. That was the story of my life. She was substance, I was style. She was a marvel of engineering. I was a pretty decoration. That day, standing by my beautiful but useless solar system, I didn't feel jealousy. I felt a cold, hard rage. I looked at my brilliant, perfect sister, and I made a silent promise to myself. One day, they would see that I was not just creative. I was strategic. They would see that beauty is not a distraction from power. It is a tool for acquiring it. This dynamic haunted our entire lives. She went a pen on a full academic scholarship. I went to the University of Miami for art history. She came back and built Sabor by Izzy with a 5-year business plan and a bank loan she secured with a presentation that left the loan officers speechless. I came back and opened a small, chic makeup studio in the design district, a business everyone, including my family, referred to as my little hobby. They didn't see the hours I spent building my client list, the shrewd way I used social media to create a brand, the relentless effort it took to turn a passion into a profit. They just saw Isabella building an empire and Sophia playing with makeup. Her husband, Marco Vargas, was the key. He was the handsome, charismatic prince consort to the great Queen Isabella. But I watched them for years. I saw the cracks in their perfect facade. I saw how she treated him, less like a partner and more like her most handsome, successful project. She loved his ambition because it reflected well on her, but she never truly respected it. She managed him. She never unleashed him. I saw him first, you know. He was a junior partner at a small development firm that catered one of their events. He walked into the room, and the energy shifted. He had a restless ambition, a hunger in his eyes that I recognized because I saw it in my own reflection every morning. I was talking to him, charming him, making him laugh. And then Isabella walked over. She didn't flirt. She didn't charm. She started talking to him about zoning variances and supply chain logistics. She saw his ambition and engaged it, challenged it. And he was instantly mesmerized. He looked at her the way the science fair judges had looked at her hydroelectric dam. With awe. He saw her as a peer, a fellow builder. In that moment, he saw me, standing beside her, as just a pretty decoration. In my mind, she didn't win him. She acquired him. He became another perfect piece in the perfect life of Isabella Garcia, another testament to her brilliance. I believe, to this day, that she loved him for that. He was her greatest project. But she never saw him as her king. She saw him as the president of her fan club. So, I played the long game. I was the perfect sister, the perfect sister-in-law. I was the fun one, the one they could relax with. I was the one Marco would call to complain when Izzy was too buried in a catering contract to go out. I was the one who would listen, who would soothe his ego, who would tell him how brilliant he was. Every word of sympathy, every validating compliment, was a small, patient investment in a future I was determined to claim. Our affair began not in a bed, but over a business plan. Marco's company, Vargas Development, was struggling. He had vision but lacked a certain ruthlessness in execution. My sister, ever the pragmatist, advised him to be cautious, to consolidate. It was sound advice. It was also the advice of a manager, not a conqueror. I gave him the opposite advice. I told him to be bold, to take risks, to use leverage as a weapon. I spent weeks with him, poring over his financials, identifying opportunities she had dismissed as too risky. I wasn't just his mistress. I became his secret strategist, his co-conspirator. He started to look at me not as his wife's pretty little sister, but as a brilliant and dangerous equal. He started to see that I was the queen he should have had all along. Which brings us to my mother's 60th birthday party. The entire event was, of course, a monument to Isabella. Held at the Fontainebleau, catered by her ridiculously successful company, Sabor by Izzy. Every detail was perfect, a testament to her control. As I walked through the ballroom in a pale gold dress that Marco's money had paid for, I saw my sister in her element, directing staff, accepting praise, a goddess of logistics and flavor. And I felt that old, familiar ache of being the lesser star in her orbit. But tonight, it wasn't an ache. It was a thrill. Because tonight, I knew the curtain was about to fall on her one-woman show. Marco and I had planned our moment, not to be caught necessarily, but to seal our pact. The stolen moments in the dressing room were not just about passion. They were a final, definitive act of treason against her reign. She has no idea, does she? He whispered, his hands tangled in my hair, the distant salsa music a perfect soundtrack for our conspiracy. She sees what she wants to see. I murmured against his lips. A perfect world with her at the center of it. She doesn't look in the shadows. I don't want to be in the shadows anymore, Sophia, he said, his voice urgent. I'm done. I'm choosing you. That was what I needed to hear. The kiss was his oath of fealty. As we stood there, I felt a flicker of movement in the corridor. I glanced towards the door and saw her. Isabella, standing there, frozen, her face a blank canvas of shock. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I didn't pull away. I didn't gasp. I held her gaze, and I let a small, almost imperceptible smile touch my lips. It was a declaration of war. Checkmate. She vanished as quickly as she appeared. Marco, lost in the moment, hadn't seen a thing. Later that night, I lay in my own bed in my Brickell apartment, the city lights glittering outside. I knew the confrontation was happening in their house in Coral Gables. I could almost hear the sound of their perfect life shattering. I felt no guilt. Guilt is a luxury for those who believe the world is fair. I knew it wasn't. The world is a battle for resources, for attention, for admiration. My sister had been winning for 34 years. Now it was my turn. The plan Marco and I had been building was about to accelerate. We were about to move on to the main event. The slow, systematic takeover of the one thing she loved more than her husband. Her company. She thought this was about a kiss. It was never about the man. It was about the throne. So tell me, when you've spent your entire life living in someone else's shadow, is it a sin to want the sun for yourself? Or is it simply your turn to shine? The morning after the party, I awoke to the soft, pale light of a Miami dawn filtering through the silk curtains of my Brickell apartment. I felt a hum beneath my skin, a high-frequency current of adrenaline and triumph. I made myself a small, potent cup of Cuban coffee and sat on my balcony, overlooking the bay. The city was waking up, a symphony of distant traffic and the gentle lapping of water against the seawall. I waited for the explosion. I expected a hurricane. A flurry of furious, all-caps text messages. A string of missed calls from a screaming Isabella. A dramatic, tearful summons from my mother. I had thrown a grenade into the heart of our perfect family, and I was braced for the shrapnel. But all I got was silence. A deep, profound, and deeply unsettling silence that lasted exactly 48 hours. I checked my phone obsessively. Nothing. I scrolled through Instagram. No passive-aggressive posts, no sudden unfollowing. It was as if the night before had never happened. This was not the sister I knew. The Isabella the first grew up with was a creature of expression, of action. When she was happy, the whole world knew it. When she was angry, she was a summer thunderstorm, loud and magnificent and cleansing. This quiet, this was new. This was the calm, methodical silence of a chessboard being set. The saint was not going to weep and pray. The saint was going to war. The opening salvo wasn't a tearful phone call. It was a clinical execution. An email from a bank I didn't recognize. Dear Ms. Garcia, this letter is to inform you that fraud alert has been placed on a joint account held by Marco Vargas and Isabella Garcia. All transactions will now require dual authorization. She had cut off my supply line. Then came another email, this one from Marco. The subject line was just my name. The body was a single, panicked sentence. She knows about the transfers. Call me. She hadn't just discovered the affair. She had discovered our financial pipeline. For months, Marco had been moving significant money from their joint accounts to my consulting firm, funding our parallel life, seeding foundations of my new business ventures. With a single, elegantly ruthless move, Isabella had turned off the tap. I met Marco that evening at a quiet, discreet bar in the Coconut Grove Marina, a place where powerful men brought women who weren't their wives.
He was a wreck.
He was pacing by the water, his handsome face a mask of anxiety. She's going to ruin me, Sophia, he said, his voice tight with panic.
She's got lawyers.
She's freezing assets. This is a nightmare. I let him vent. I watched the fear play across his features, the way his confidence had evaporated into a cloud of helpless paranoia. This was the man who had promised me a kingdom. He looked more like a court jester who had just been caught stealing the crown jewels. This was my first true test, not just as a conspirator, but as the one who was truly in charge. I took his hand, my touch calm and steady. Marco, breathe, I said, my voice a low, soothing melody. Did you really think she would do nothing? This is predictable. This is what wounded animals do. They lash out. This isn't lashing out. This is a strategic assault, he hissed. She's not wounded, Sophia. She's a shark. A slow, cold smile touched my lips. Good, I said. I was so tired of swimming with goldfish. Now, listen to me. She has made a classic mistake. She thinks this is about money. She thinks she can cut us off, and we'll starve. She is trying to win a battle of attrition. We are not going to play her game. We are going to change the entire board. I guided him to a dark corner table and laid out the next phase of our war. She has cut us off from her money, I said. So we will acquire our own. We will use her greatest asset against her, her perfect name. My plan was audacious, dangerous, and beautiful in its simplicity. We would take out a significant business loan, not in our names, but in Isabella's. Marco, through his business dealings, had a high-resolution scan of her signature from a partnership document signed years ago. I, with my artist's eye and steady hand, could perfect it, make it untraceable. We would use her pristine credit, her reputation as a successful entrepreneur, as collateral. It wasn't just about the money. It was a profound act of violation, of identity theft. It was about proving that her name, her power, was something I could simply take and wear as my own. Marco stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. Sophia, that's fraud. That's a serious crime. Is it? I asked, leaning closer, my voice a seductive whisper. Or is it simply reallocating family assets? She is hoarding the resources of this partnership, Marco. We are simply borrowing our share to fund our future. Her name, her credit, you helped build that. You are entitled to use it. I was not just his partner. I was his priestess, absolving him of his sins before he even committed them. I watched the fear in his eyes recede, replaced by the familiar, reckless ambition I had first fallen for. I had him. The forgery was an intimate, almost sensual act. In the quiet of my apartment, I projected the image of my sister's signature onto my tablet. It was so much like her, elegant, controlled, with a bold, decisive flourish at the end. For hours I traced it, learning its rhythms, its pressures, its soul. Then I began to replicate it. It was more than mimicry. I was channeling her, feeling the confidence and arrogance that must have flowed through her hand every time she signed a check or a contract. When I was finished, the signature on the digital loan application was not a copy. It was a resurrection. It was perfect. We submitted the application to a small, hungry microfinance bank that was less likely to scrutinize the details. While we waited, we put on our own performance. On Friday afternoon, I received the notification. The loan was approved. $10,000 had been deposited into a new account I controlled. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. It was the seed capital for the next phase of our war, the hostile takeover of Sabor by Izzy. We used a crooked agent to file a forged board resolution with the Corporate Affairs Commission, appointing me as an interim director of her company. It was a clumsy, audacious move, designed to create legal chaos and give us a foothold inside her corporate structure. That night, Marco and I celebrated at a rooftop restaurant in Victoria Island, the lights of the city glittering below us like a conquered kingdom. He was giddy with relief and excitement. We did it, Sophia, he said, raising his champagne glass. We actually did it. This is just the beginning, Marco, I said, my voice steady. First, we take her resources. Then, we take her company. And then, we take her name. He looked at me, his love and admiration shining in his eyes. He thought we were partners, building a future together. He didn't understand. I wasn't building a partnership. I was building a throne. And in my empire, there would only be one ruler. So tell me, they say crime doesn't pay. But when the world has denied you what you believe is your fair share, sometimes you just have to write your own invoices. To get what you truly deserve, are there any rules you wouldn't be willing to break? The week after we secured the loan was intoxicating. The $10,000 that appeared in my account wasn't just money, it was validation. It was a symbol of my own brilliance, a tangible measure of my victory over my sister's suffocating, self-righteous control. I had used her own good name, the very foundation of her identity, to finance my ascent. Marco and I were drunk on the power of it. We spent our days drafting the next phase of our attack, outlining how we would use my new, fraudulent position as interim director, to slowly bleed Sabor by Izzy dry. We'd start by redirecting vendor payments, then move to poaching her biggest clients, all under the guise of legitimate business. We were untouchable. We were brilliant. We were fools. I was at my makeup studio in the design district, sketching out a new logo, one that incorporated a subtle crown, when the first tremor hit. It arrived not as a dramatic confrontation, but as a quiet, clinical email with a PDF attachment. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of, Reyes and Associates. The letterhead was heavy, expensive. The language was cold, precise, and utterly terrifying.
It was a cease and desist.
It stated, in no uncertain terms, that a fraudulent filing had been made with the Florida Division of Corporations concerning the company, Sabor by Izzy, LLC. It named me, Sofia Garcia, as the party responsible for the fraudulent document. It demanded an immediate withdrawal of the filing and the preservation of all electronic and physical documents related to my shell company, CNJ Studios. It was signed by a Mateo Reyes Esq. My hands went cold. Mateo, our cousin, the quiet, bookish one who had gone to law school at Georgetown. Isabella wasn't just fighting back with emotion. She was deploying the law like a trained sniper. I immediately called Marco, my voice a tight, controlled whisper. She knows about the filing. She's got Mateo sending letters. What? Marco's voice was thin with panic.
How?
How could she know so fast? It doesn't matter how. I snapped, my patience wearing thin. What matters is that she's not playing defense anymore. She's on the attack. Before we could strategize, the second blow landed. An alert from the microfinance bank. The loan account had been frozen, pending an internal fraud investigation initiated at the request of the primary borrower, Isabella Garcia. Our capital, the very seed of our new empire, vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The digital well was dry. Marco fell apart. It's over, Sophia, he moaned over the phone. We're facing felonies. Fraud, identity theft. My God, my career will be ruined. We have to call her, apologize, beg her to stop. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated contempt. I had allied myself with a man who had the ambition of a king but the spine of a jellyfish. His weakness was a liability I could no longer afford. Pull yourself together, Marco, I said, my voice like ice. Begging is surrender. We do not surrender. We are not the criminals here. We are the ones who have been oppressed, underestimated. She is the one who is overreacting, using a bazooka to kill a fly. We will use that against her. It was my idea to call the meeting. I told Marco to text her, to use classic manipulator's plea. We can talk. Let's meet. Come alone. My strategy was to get her in a room, away from her lawyer cousin, where Marco's charm and my emotional appeals could work on her. We would paint her as the vengeful, hysterical woman tearing her family apart over a simple mistake. We would shame her into backing down. The lounge in Betrayal was my choice. It was dark, loud, and full of mirrors, the perfect stage for a drama of deception. I arrived separately and took a table in a dark corner where I could watch the entrance. I saw Marco arrive, looking nervous and out of his depth. A few minutes later, Isabella walked in. She wore a simple, severe black dress, her face calm and unreadable. She looked like a woman walking into a business negotiation, not a family crisis. And then, the door opened again. Mateo Reyes, her lawyer, walked in, his briefcase a silent declaration of war. He sat down beside her. From my corner table, I watched the scene play out, my stomach twisting into a knot of cold fury. I saw Marco's face drain of color. I saw the quiet, unshakable confidence of my sister and cousin. She had refused to be the emotional victim. She had refused to play the role I had written for her. She had brought her own script, and a lawyer to enforce it. The meeting lasted less than 5 minutes. They stood up and walked out, leaving Marco sitting there alone, a monument to his own failure. After he left, I sat there for a long time, the thumping bass of the lounge music mocking the silent rage in my heart. My plan, so brilliant and audacious, had backfired spectacularly. I had underestimated her. I had seen her as a saint, a pillar of predictable, emotional goodness. I had never considered that underneath the saint was a strategist as cold and methodical as I was. I had been playing a passionate game of seduction and betrayal. She was playing a cold, silent game of chess. And she had just taken my queen. In that moment, my goal, which had been a somewhat hazy ambition to usurp her life, crystallized into something much harder and more dangerous. This was no longer about proving I was better than her. This was about survival. Isabella and her legal machine would not stop until they had ground us into dust. They would come for Marco's business, for my studio, for our freedom. To survive, I had to do more than just fight back. I had to utterly destroy her credibility. I had to ruin her, personally and professionally, before she could ruin me. The war was no longer about taking her throne. It was about burning her kingdom to the ground so she would have nothing left to rule. So I ask you, when your perfectly laid plans explode in your face, when your enemy reveals themselves to be far stronger than you ever imagined, what do? Do you beg for mercy? Or do you start building a better, deadlier bomb? The weeks following our disastrous meeting in Betrayal were a masterclass in controlled demolition, with my life as the building being brought down. Isabella's counterattack was not a loud, emotional storm. It was a quiet, suffocating siege. Every day brought a new letter from her lawyer, Mateo Reyes, each one a paper sword slicing away at our defenses. There were injunctions, discovery requests, and formal challenges to every financial move Marco and I had made in the last year. The fraudulent loan was officially in dispute, a black mark on my credit that made it impossible to secure so much as a new cell phone plan. The forged corporate filing for Sabor by Izzy was summarily rejected by the state, accompanied by a notice that a formal investigation into the fraudulent use of a notary seal was underway. We were legally and financially paralyzed. And Marco, my partner in this grand, ambitious crime, was crumbling. He became a ghost in his own life. He drank too much, his nights filled with the bitter fumes of expensive whiskey and self-pity. He paced the length of his condo, his phone in his hand, ranting about how Isabella was a vengeful monster, a vindictive shrew. But beneath the anger, I heard the whining note of fear. He was terrified. "This is your fault, Sophia," he slurred one night, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. "You pushed me. You said it was brilliant. You said she wouldn't fight back like this." I looked at him, at this weak, terrified man who had been the key to my grand ambition, and I felt nothing but a profound, cold contempt. "I thought I was in a partnership with a lion," I said, my voice quiet. "It seems I made a mistake and allied myself with a lamb." "Stop whimpering, Marco. It's pathetic." I knew then that I was alone in this war. I had to change my strategy. A direct assault had failed. Isabella had outmaneuvered me on the legal and financial battlefield. She was too clean, too prepared, her integrity a fortress I couldn't breach with conventional weapons. So, I decided to attack the foundation of that fortress. I would not attack her business. I would attack her myth. The world saw Isabella Garcia as a saint, a brilliant, hard-working, and deeply honorable woman who had been tragically betrayed. To win, I had to do more than prove my own innocence. I had to prove that the saint was a sinner, just like me. I needed to find a crack in her perfect, sanctimonious halo. I needed to find her original sin. My new investigation was not about numbers or contracts. It was about whispers, memories, and the bitter resentments that collect like dust in the corners of every family history. I became a historian of my own sister. I spent hours on the phone with distant aunts and uncles, with old family friends from our childhood in Little Havana. I took former, disgruntled employees of Sabor out for expensive lunches, letting them vent their frustrations. My questions were subtle, wrapped in a performance of a confused younger sister trying to understand her brilliant but complicated older sibling. "I just don't understand how she became so hard," I would say, my voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed vulnerability. The Real break came from the most unlikely of sources. Our Tia Maria, our grandmother's sister, a woman who lived in a small, lavender-scented house and communicated almost exclusively in Catholic guilt and cryptic proverbs. I visited her under the guise of seeking family comfort. "Your sister, she was always a hurricane in a teacup," Tia Maria said, her hands busy with her needlepoint. "So much ambition, just like your grandfather." "She built everything on her own," I said, laying the bait. "It's incredible." Tia Maria looked up from her work, her old eyes sharp and clear. "On her own? No, Mija. No one builds alone." Her first big success, that contract with the Regent Hotel that started everything? She got that because of your abuela's adobo recipe. My blood went still. Abuela's adobo. It was the stuff of family legend, a secret blend of spices that our grandmother had brought with her from Cuba. It was the taste of our childhood. Before she died, she had made both Isabella and me promise that the recipe would stay in the family. It was a legacy, not a product. The Regent chef was famous, Tia Maria continued, oblivious to the bomb she had just detonated in my mind. He tasted her food at a small festival and said he'd never had anything like it. He offered her the contract on the spot, on the condition that the adobo was a permanent part of the menu. Isabella was struggling then. She took the deal. A necessary shortcut, perhaps. Your abuela, may she rest in peace, would not have approved. There it was. The crack in the halo. The original sin. The foundation of my sister's entire empire was built on a broken promise to a dead woman. It was a betrayal of our family, our legacy, our history. It was a profound and undeniable act of hypocrisy. This was a weapon. Not a legal weapon, but a moral one. It was a paper sword, but one sharp enough to slice her public image to ribbons. I would leak it. I would give the story to a source who specialized in this kind of narrative warfare, a popular, sharp-tongued Miami lifestyle blogger named Victoria Vance, whose column, Vance's Verdict, was a must-read for the city's elite. I spent the next 2 days crafting an anonymous email, a masterpiece of sympathetic, third-person narration. I told the story of 2 sisters, of a dying grandmother's wish, of a secret family recipe, and of one sister's ruthless ambition. I attached a small, grainy photo of our abuela's handwritten recipe card, a picture I had found in an old family album. I sent the email from a burner account at a public library. Then I waited. So tell me, my sister built a cathedral to her own integrity. But I found the crack in the stained glass window. To win a war against a saint, do you need to prove she is a demon? Or do you just need to prove she is a sinner, like the rest of us? The blog post dropped on a Friday afternoon, perfectly timed to dominate the weekend's gossip. The headline was a work of art. Sabor's secret spice. Did Miami's culinary queen build her empire on a broken promise? The success of the story was more beautiful and more potent than I could have ever imagined. It was like dropping a single, perfectly chosen drop of poison into a crystal-clear reservoir. The story spread not like a wildfire, but like a contagion, passed in hushed tones at cocktail parties in Fisher Island, in gossipy texts between the wives of executives, and in the comment sections of every major Miami food blog. The city's elite, who had been so quick to condemn me, were now captivated by a new, more delicious narrative, the fallen saint. I spent the weekend orchestrating a symphony of whispers from the anonymity of my apartment. I became a master of digital puppetry. I created a dozen fake social media profiles, the concerned mother from Pinecrest, the savvy young foodie from Wynwood, the bitter ex-employee. From behind these masks, I fanned the flames. I shared the article in exclusive neighborhood Facebook groups. I left comments dripping with feigned sympathy. Such a shame when family business gets this ugly, I'd write. It just shows you never really know what happens behind closed doors. I wasn't trying to prove I was innocent. I was trying to prove that my sister wasn't a saint. And in the court of public opinion, a tarnished saint is often judged more harshly than an admitted sinner. Isabella's reaction was exactly what I had predicted. On Monday morning, her lawyer, my dear cousin Mateo, issued a terse, formal statement to the press. Ms. Garcia will not be commenting on malicious rumors or private family matters. She remains focused on the success of her business and the legal proceedings already underway. I read the statement and laughed aloud in my empty apartment. It was a declaration of war, written in the cold, unfeeling language of corporate damage control. To the public, it read as cold, dismissive, and, most importantly, guilty. She had refused to engage with the emotion of the story, and in doing so, she had ceded the entire emotional battlefield to me. Now that I had control of the public narrative, it was time to conquer the private one. My next move was my most treacherous and most necessary. I went after our family. I began with the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, the deeply entrenched, deeply judgmental jury of our Cuban-American clan. I did not call them with anger or accusations. I called them in tears. My performance was worthy of an Oscar. I was the heartbroken, misunderstood younger sister, swept up in a forbidden love and now being crushed by my powerful, unforgiving sibling. I know I made a mistake, Tia. I subbed over the phone to our mother's sister. I fell in love with a man who wasn't mine. But I never wanted this war. I try to talk to Izzy, to apologize, but she won't even speak to me. She just sends these horrible letters from her lawyer. She's trying to ruin me, to take my business, to put Marco in jail. She wants to destroy us. I painted Isabella not as a victim, but as a cold, vengeful tyrant. I twisted her disciplined, strategic response into a portrait of inhuman cruelty. The seeds of doubt I planted in their minds began to sprout. My final target was the heart of the family, our mother. I went to her house in Coral Gables with my eyes red-rimmed and my face pale. I collapsed into her arms and confessed everything, a carefully edited version of the truth. "Mommy, I am so sorry," I wept. "I love him. I know it's wrong, but I do. And Izzy, she has a right to be angry. But she's trying to destroy us. She's trying to destroy the family. All I want is peace." My mother, a woman caught between her two daughters, was torn. She saw my tears, my apparent remorse, and then she thought of Isabella's cold, lawyer-driven silence. I had successfully framed my sister's strength as her greatest weakness. With the family in turmoil, I gave Marco his new role. He was no longer a co-conspirator. He was a pawn. I coached him. I gave him his lines. He was to play the part of the repentant, tormented man, caught between two powerful sisters. He started calling our mutual friends, his voice thick with a rehearsed anguish. "I messed up," he'd say. "I broke Izzy's heart, and I'll regret it forever." But she was just so distant, so focused on her empire. And Sophia was just there. She listened. It was a masterpiece of non-apology, a subtle shifting of blame that muddied the waters to an opaque, murky brown. The culmination of my performance took place, as it always did, at church. I arrived alone, wearing a simple, modest dress, my face free of makeup. When members of the congregation approached me to offer their hushed, tentative sympathies, I would give them a sad, watery smile. "Thank you for your prayers," I'd whisper. "It's a difficult time. I just wish we could solve this as a family." But Isabella, she will only speak to me through her lawyers now. I could see the shift in their eyes. I was publicly performing the role of the peacemaker, all while privately orchestrating the complete and utter annihilation of her reputation. The reports I got back from my network of family and friends were glorious. Isabella was furious. She was withdrawing, lashing out at our mother for falling for Sophia's act. She felt betrayed by a family that was supposed to be on her side. She was becoming an island. Her lawsuits were still pending, a guillotine hanging over our heads. But a lawsuit is only as strong as the credibility of the plaintiff. And every day, with every whisper, every rumor, every performance of my own victimhood, I was chipping away at the foundation of her credibility. So tell me, my sister came to war with an army of facts and lawyers. I came with a better story. In the battle for a person's soul, which weapon do you think is more powerful? The undeniable truth, or the story that people want to believe is true? The beautiful thing about a well-told story is that it becomes more real than the truth. My story, the story of the flawed, passionate, but ultimately well-intentioned sister, crushed by the cold, unforgiving legal machine of her perfect sibling, had taken root in the fertile soil of Miami's gossip circles. Isabella's fortress of integrity was crumbling, eroded by a constant tide of whispers. She was no longer the unimpeachable victim. She was now the cold-hearted shrew, and I, the architect of her reputational ruin, was the misunderstood soul worthy of sympathy. I was the queen of whispers, and I reveled in the power of it. I had neutralized my sister's greatest weapon. Now it was time for my final, decisive move, a move so audacious, so public, that it would permanently cement my victory and force the world to recognize my new status. It was time to stop being the other woman and start being the only woman. The idea for the engagement was mine, of course. Marco, in his weakened, paranoid state, would never have conceived of something so bold. I found him one evening in his condo, staring out at the darkening skyline, a half-empty bottle of rum on the table beside him. He was a man adrift, terrified of the legal storm my sister was methodically gathering. He needed a purpose, an anchor. I decided to give him one. "We can't keep living like this, Marco," I said softly, coming up behind him and wrapping my arms around his shoulders. Hiding, waiting for her next move. "We need to show them that we're not afraid, that what we have isn't a dirty secret, that it's real." "What are you talking about?" he mumbled. "I'm talking about our future," I said, my voice a silken weave of romance and strategy. "I'm talking about a public declaration. I'm talking about an engagement. We will throw the most talked-about engagement party this city has ever seen. We'll show everyone, your business partners, the banks, my sister, that we are a united, powerful front. It's not just a party, Marco. It's a power move." I was speaking his language now. Not the language of love, but the language of leverage, of public relations, of victory. I saw the spark return to his eyes. He was a weak man, but a vain one, and the idea of a grand public spectacle where he was the conquering hero was a balm to his terrified ego. He proposed the next day, on the beach at sunset, with a ridiculously large diamond ring he had purchased with the last of his non-frozen capital. The diamond was cold and heavy on my finger. I looked at it not as a symbol of his love, but as a trophy. It was a crown, and I had won it. I threw myself into planning the party, with the obsessive focus of a general planning a decisive battle. This would be my coronation, and every detail had to be a perfectly crafted message of my triumph. I chose a private, waterfront villa on Star Island, a place so exclusive it was practically a fortress. I hired a celebrity event planner. The theme was white-hot, a subtle but deliberate jab at my sister's cold, dark navy blue aesthetic. The guest list was a carefully curated collection of Miami's most influential players, the very people whose respect and validation I craved. And then my masterstroke. I sat down with a piece of thick, cream-colored stationery and wrote a note to my sister. I tucked it inside a formal invitation. "Izzy," I wrote, my penmanship a perfect, flowing script. "I know this must be difficult for you, and I know you are in pain. But what Marco and I have is real, and we are moving forward with our lives. As a gesture of peace, and in the hope that one day our family can heal, I wanted to personally invite you to celebrate our engagement. You will always be my sister. Love, Sophia." It was a masterpiece of passive aggression, a beautifully written vial of poison. I knew she would never come. But the act of inviting her, the gesture of peace, was a public performance. When the story of the party was inevitably written, I would be the magnanimous sister who had extended an olive branch, and she would be the bitter, unforgiving ex-wife who had refused it. The night of the party was a perfect Miami evening. A warm breeze drifted in off the bay, the sky was a canvas of deep indigo, and the lights of the city glittered across the water. The villa was transformed, a paradise of white orchids, flowing champagne, and beautiful people. I wore a stunning, backless white couture gown. The diamond on my finger caught the light, sending out shards of brilliant fire. I was the sun in my own universe. I stood with Marco at my side, greeting our guests, accepting congratulations, playing the part of the blissful fiancé. Every smile was a performance. Every kiss we shared was a strategic move. Just as Marco was about to make the official announcement, tapping his champagne flute for attention, I saw it. A flash of blue and red light, strobing silently against the manicured hedges at the end of the long, private driveway. The salsa band quieted, and a hush fell over our 100 guests. 2 figures, then 4, then 6, were moving through the party. They were not guests. They were dressed in dark blue windbreakers with bold, yellow letters emblazoned on the back. FBI. The world seemed to slow down. The agents moved with a quiet, terrifying efficiency, parting the crowd of couture gowns and bespoke suits like the Red Sea. They were heading directly for us. A woman with a severe haircut and eyes that held no warmth stopped before us. Her gaze was fixed on Marco. "Marco Vargas?" she said, her voice calm and devoid of all emotion. "You are under arrest on behalf of the United States government for the charges of wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Then the woman turned her cold, analytical eyes to me. "Sofia Garcia? You are under arrest as a co-conspirator in these crimes, and for the additional charges of aggravated identity theft and conspiracy to commit bank fraud." As another agent stepped forward to take my arms, my eyes darted frantically around the crowd. And then I saw her. She was standing just beyond the edge of the villa's property, on the public street, partially obscured by the shadow of a palm tree. It was Isabella. She was not crying. She was not smiling. Her face was a perfect, beautiful, and terrifying mask of calm neutrality. She was simply watching her work unfold. Our eyes met, and in that single, silent glance, I understood everything. The whisper campaign, the family drama, the engagement party. It had all been a diversion. A cloud of ink I had released into the water while she, the silent shark, had circled, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She hadn't been fighting me on my battlefield of gossip and public opinion. She had been building a case, a meticulous, ironclad, federal case, in a war room I never even knew existed. She had let me plan this party. She had let me build the stage. This wasn't my coronation. It was her execution. And she had made me build the gallows myself. So tell me, when you stand on the precipice of your greatest victory, so close you can taste it, do you ever stop to think that your opponent, the one you thought you had defeated, might be holding a better hand? The first thing you notice after a spectacular fall is the silence. It's a different kind of silence from the one I had known in my sister's shadow. That was a silence of being overlooked, a quiet humming of resentment. This new silence was absolute, sterile, and profound. It was the silence of a holding cell, the silence of a world that has already judged you, convicted you, and moved on. The glorious, chaotic noise of my life, the clinking of champagne glasses, the roar of a sports car, the whispers of admiration, had been extinguished in an instant. All that was left was the fluorescent buzz of a light that never turned off and the echoing memory of a single, metallic click, the sound of handcuffs closing around my wrists. My beautiful white couture gown was replaced by a coarse, ill-fitting jumpsuit the color of regret. My diamond ring was sealed in an evidence bag. My name, Sofia Garcia, was no longer a whisper on the lips of Miami's elite, but a case number typed onto a federal docket. My war was over. I had not just lost. I had been annihilated. The legal fallout was as swift and merciless as Isabella's planning. Marco, my king, my partner, my great love, revealed himself for what he truly was, a coward. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, he crumbled. He took the first deal the prosecutors offered, a deal that required him to lay the blame for the entire conspiracy squarely at my feet. He painted me as the seductive, manipulative mastermind, the Lady Macbeth to his easily led fool. He confessed to everything, and in doing so, he signed my conviction. I watched his testimony from across the courtroom, my face a mask of cold stone. I felt no surprise, no new wave of betrayal.
He was weak.
I had known that. My greatest failure was in believing I could build an empire on a foundation of such pathetic, crumbling material. He was sentenced to 18 months in a low-security federal prison. I have not heard from him since. The co-conspirator, the architect of our brilliant, failed coup, was left to face the wreckage. My court-appointed lawyer, a tired man who looked at me with a profound sense of disappointment, advised me to plead for mercy,
To cry.
to express remorse. I refused. I would not give Isabella the satisfaction of my tears. I took a deal, but I did so with my head held high. The sentence, 3 years of probation, 2,000 hours of community service, and a restitution order so vast it would ensure I would never own anything of value again for the rest of my life. My makeup studio was seized and liquidated. My beautiful apartment in Betrayal was forfeited. I was financially and socially executed. The public narrative, the one I had so masterfully corrupted, snapped back into its original, brutal shape. The story of my sister's hypocrisy over a family recipe was rightly seen for what it was, a pathetic, desperate diversion. The truth, backed by a federal indictment, was the only story left standing. Isabella Garcia was the brilliant, resilient victim of a monstrous betrayal. I was the jealous, criminal sister. The world loves a simple story, and I had become the villain in a fairy tale of my own making. I saw Isabella one last time on the final day of my sentencing. She was sitting in the back row, dressed in a simple, severe black suit. She was not there to gloat. She was not there to offer support. She was simply there, a silent observer, a witness to the final, quiet click of her own trap closing. Her face was unreadable. Her victory was so total, so absolute, that it required no expression. In that moment, I hated her more than I ever had before, a pure, clean hatred untainted by love or history. I hated her for her strength. I hated her for her silence. I hated her for being right. And so, the curtain fell. My sister won with law, and I lost with lies. But tell me, when the game is over and the victor stands alone on the field, is the victory truly sweet if it costs you your entire family? My probation is almost over now. I live in a small, rented room in a neighborhood I once would have driven through with my windows up and my doors locked. I work as a cashier at a department store. Sometimes I see women come in who used to be my friends, my clients.
They do not recognize me, or they pretend not to.
I am a ghost again, but of a different kind. The other day at the checkout counter, I saw a copy of Forbes magazine. And there she was on the cover. My sister, Isabella Garcia. The article was titled, "The Unbreakable Isabella Garcia, How Miami's Culinary Queen Turned Betrayal into a Billion-Dollar Empire." The photo was of her standing on the balcony of our old house in Coral Gables, which she now owned outright. She looked powerful. She looked serene. She looked happy. I looked at the picture of her perfect life, the one I had so nearly claimed, and I waited for the familiar, hot sting of rage. But it was not rage I felt. It was just a quiet, familiar ache. The deep, resonant echo of a life spent in the shadow, a place I now knew I would never truly leave. This was my confession. You have been my witness and my jury. Now, deliver your verdict in the comments below. If you believe there are two sides to every story, show your support with a like and subscribe for more confessions from the shadows. The truth is rarely as simple as they want you to believe. So, I leave you with one final confession, one final question. Is it a greater sin to want a beautiful life and be willing to do anything to get it? Or to have a beautiful life and be willing to do anything to keep it? In the end, stripped of all our lies and justifications, weren't we both just fighting for our own place in the sun?